Did you murder your wife?
No, I did not. And I have absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance.
When 27-year-old Laci failed to return home on Christmas Eve, her family's holiday celebrations instantly turned to panic. 8 months pregnant and eagerly awaiting her first child, she had seemingly vanished without struggle from her own home, her car still in the driveway, her purse untouched. While her husband Scott appeared on television pleading for her safe return, detectives noticed something off about his calm demeanor. For 4 agonizing months, the nation held its breath. Then, on a spring day in 2003, the tide in San Francisco Bay delivered a grim answer when 2 bodies washed ashore just miles from where Scott claimed he'd gone fishing that Christmas morning. But what investigators discovered next would expose a web of lies so calculated that it would transform a missing persons case into one of America's most notorious murder trials. Christmas Eve, 2002. While families across America were gathering to celebrate the holiday in Modesto, California, a 27-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant vanished without a trace. Laci Peterson had been preparing for her first Christmas as an expectant mother, decorating her home and buying gifts for the baby boy she planned to name Connor. 4 months later, the nation would watch in horror as 2 bodies washed ashore in the San Francisco Bay, a woman and the remains of a full-term male fetus. The gruesome discovery transformed what had begun as a missing persons case into one of the most notorious murder investigations in American history. What made this case capture the attention of millions wasn't just the tragedy of a mother and her unborn child's lives cut short. It was the web of deception that slowly unraveled, revealing that the person closest to Laci, the man who should have protected her most, was leading a double life. As investigators peeled back layers of lies, they uncovered a trail of evidence pointing to a calculated plan disguised behind the facade of a loving husband. The Laci Peterson case would ultimately expose how appearances can be devastatingly deceptive, and how a picture-perfect marriage can mask the darkest of intentions. The truth about what happened on that Christmas Eve morning would prove more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Welcome to Last Seen Stories, where we examine the cases that have shocked communities and left lasting impacts on our collective consciousness. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most publicized disappearances of the early 2000s, a case that dominated headlines and divided public opinion about the guilt of a man who presented himself as a grieving husband while secretly planning his escape. Before we begin this tragic story, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our upcoming investigations. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Now let's turn back the clock to 2002 and uncover the full story of Laci Peterson, a young woman whose life was cut tragically short just as she was about to become a mother. Laci Denise Rocha was born in Modesto, California on May 4, 1975. Those who knew her described her as vibrant and outgoing, a woman with an infectious laugh who lit up every room she entered. With her dark hair, warm smile, and nurturing personality, Laci was someone who naturally gravitated toward caring for others. Growing up in California's Central Valley, she was close to her mother Sharon, stepfather Ron, and her siblings. After high school, Laci attended California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, where she studied ornamental horticulture. It was there in 1994 that she met Scott Peterson while working as a waitress at a local restaurant. Scott, a year younger than Laci, was handsome and charming, a business major with aspirations of becoming a professional golfer. Their chemistry was immediate, and within months they were inseparable. After dating for 2 years, the couple moved in together, and in 1997 they married in a scenic ceremony at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. To friends and family, they appeared to be the perfect match: young, attractive, and ambitious. Following graduation, they opened a sports bar called The Shack, which they ran together before selling it and moving back to Laci's hometown of Modesto in 2000. In Modesto, Scott found work as a fertilizer salesman while Laci embraced domestic life, decorating their home and tending to her garden. When she discovered she was pregnant in 2002, Laci was overjoyed. She transformed a bedroom into a nursery and eagerly prepared for motherhood. The couple chose the name Connor for their son, and as Laci's due date in February 2003 approached, she glowed with anticipation. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, cracks were forming. Scott's business trips became more frequent, and he often seemed detached from Laci's enthusiasm about the baby. While Laci immersed herself in preparing for motherhood, Scott was quietly creating a separate life, one that would shock everyone who thought they knew him. What friends and family couldn't see was that Scott had grown restless in his marriage. He had begun telling colleagues that he was looking forward to living the life of a bachelor again. More significantly, by April 2002, Scott had begun an affair with a massage therapist named Amber Frey, a single mother who had no idea Scott was married, let alone expecting a child. December 23, 2002 began as a normal day for Laci and Scott. According to later testimony, they watched a movie together that evening before going to bed. It would be their last night together. The morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve, started routinely. According to Scott, he awoke around 8:30 a.m. and found Laci already up and getting dressed to walk their dog, Mackenzie. Scott claimed they discussed their plans for the day. Laci would finish some Christmas shopping and preparations, while Scott would go fishing at Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away. By Scott's account, he left their home around 9:30 a.m., first stopping at his warehouse to get his boat, then driving to the marina. While at the warehouse, he checked his email and used his computer. Meanwhile, a neighbor reported seeing Laci walking the dog between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Around 4:30 p.m., Scott called Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, asking if Laci was with her. When Sharon said no, Scott explained that Laci's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't home, and the dog was in the backyard with its leash on. Alarmed, Sharon and other family members rushed to the Peterson home. By 5:48 p.m., Laci's stepfather, Ron Gransky, called the police to report her missing. When officers arrived, they found a scene that immediately raised concerns. Laci's purse was still in the house, her car in the driveway. A mop and bucket stood in the middle of the kitchen, as if someone had been interrupted while cleaning. On the counter was Laci's curling iron, plugged in but turned off. Everything pointed to someone who had not planned to leave the house for long. Scott told police about his fishing trip, explaining he'd left that morning and spent the day at Berkeley Marina. When he returned home, he found Mackenzie in the backyard with the leash attached to his collar, but no sign of Laci. He said he'd assumed she was at her mother's house and had taken a shower before calling to check on her whereabouts. As darkness fell on Christmas Eve, the Peterson home became the center of a growing search operation. Family and friends gathered, and police began interviewing neighbors and organizing search parties. But while those around him descended into panic and grief, investigators noted something unusual. Scott Peterson remained oddly calm. He didn't join search parties. He spoke of Laci in the past tense. And most disturbingly, when offered a flyer to help find his missing wife, he declined, saying he didn't need one. Within 24 hours of Laci's disappearance, as her family frantically searched and prayed for her safe return, the first red flags about Scott's behavior had already emerged. As Christmas passed and a new year began, the search for Laci intensified. The Modesto Police Department assembled a team of detectives dedicated solely to the case, while volunteers combed parks, canals, and wooded areas throughout Stanislaus County. Scott's story about his fishing trip quickly became a focus for investigators. When detectives asked what he had been fishing for, Scott claimed he was trying to catch sturgeon but couldn't recall what bait he had used. More suspiciously, his newly purchased boat appeared unused, and he had no fishing equipment set up when he returned to the marina parking lot. Surveillance footage later showed his truck arriving at and leaving the marina, but no evidence he had actually gone fishing. The investigation took a dramatic turn on January 24, 2003, when Amber Frey, a 28-year-old massage therapist from Fresno, held a press conference alongside the Modesto police. Standing before reporters, she made a stunning revelation. "I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002. I was introduced to him. I was told he was unmarried. Scott told me he was not married. We did have a romantic relationship." Frey explained that she had contacted police after seeing news reports about Laci's disappearance. She revealed that Scott had told her weeks before Laci vanished that he had lost his wife and would be spending his first Christmas without her. Even after Laci was reported missing, Scott continued his relationship with Amber, calling her on Christmas Eve, hours after reporting Laci's disappearance, and celebrating New Year's Eve with her while search parties looked for his wife. What Scott didn't know was that after discovering his true identity, Amber had agreed to work with police. She began recording their phone conversations, amassing nearly 300 hours of calls that would later become crucial evidence. In these recordings, Scott can be heard claiming to be in Paris when he was actually attending a candlelight vigil for Laci in Modesto. He fabricated elaborate stories about business trips while continuing to pursue his relationship with Amber. As these details emerged, public opinion rapidly turned against Scott. The grieving husband facade began to crumble as media outlets reported on his affair and his unusual behavior following Laci's disappearance. Surveillance showed him checking out the waters at Berkeley Marina repeatedly in the weeks after she vanished. He also inquired about selling their home and attempted to sell Laci's car just weeks after her disappearance. If you're finding this case as disturbing as millions did when it unfolded, please hit the like button so more people can discover this story. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. At this point in the investigation, what do you think happened to Laci Peterson? Share your theories below. As January turned to February and Laci's due date passed with no sign of her, investigators continued building their case against Scott. They discovered he had taken out a $250,000 life insurance policy on Laci, researched bay currents in the area where he claimed to have gone fishing, and purchased a boat that only a handful of people knew about. The evidence was mounting, but without Laci's body, prosecutors were hesitant to file charges. Then came a discovery that would change everything. On April 13, 2003, nearly 4 months after Laci's disappearance, a woman walking her dog along the shoreline of Point Isabel Regional Park in Richmond, California, made a grisly discovery. The decomposed body of a male fetus had washed ashore. The next day, about a mile away, the partial remains of a woman's body were found. DNA tests confirmed what many had feared. The bodies were those of Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The location was significant. Point Isabel sits directly across from the Berkeley Marina, where Scott claimed to have gone fishing on the day of Laci's disappearance. Ocean current experts later testified that a body dumped from a boat in the area Scott had been could have drifted to precisely where the remains were found. The condition of the bodies told a disturbing story. The advanced decomposition indicated Laci had been in the water since around the time she disappeared. Forensic examination revealed that plastic tape had been wrapped around the fetus's neck, suggesting it had been used to weigh down Laci's body. Most significantly, while Laci's body was largely skeletal, Connor's body was remarkably well preserved, protected inside his mother's womb, until the tissues around him decomposed enough for him to separate from her remains. With the discovery of the bodies, police moved quickly. Scott, who had dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee, and lost weight, was under surveillance as he appeared to be preparing to flee. On April 18, 2003, authorities arrested him near a golf course in San Diego, just miles from the Mexican border. In his car, detectives found $15,000 in cash, camping equipment, multiple cell phones, his brother's driver's license, and a map to Amber Frey's workplace. The discovery of Scott so close to the border, with what appeared to be escape provisions, further cemented public opinion against him. Prosecutors charged him with 2 counts of murder: first-degree murder with special circumstances for Laci, and second-degree murder for the unborn Connor. The special circumstances, multiple murders, and murder with premeditation, made Scott eligible for the death penalty if convicted. As news of the body's discovery and Scott's arrest spread, the nation watched in horror. The tragic confirmation brought closure to the question of Laci's fate, but opened a new chapter in a case that had already captivated America. On June 1, 2004, 14 months after Laci's body was found, Scott Peterson's murder trial began. Due to extensive publicity in Modesto, the proceedings were moved to Redwood City, California. Judge Alfred A. DeLucchi presided over what would become one of the most closely watched trials in recent American history. Prosecutor Rick DiStasso opened by painting Scott as a man who killed his wife to escape the responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage. He wants to live the rich, successful, freewheeling bachelor life, DiStasso told jurors. That's his motive. The prosecution methodically laid out their case: Scott's affair with Amber Frey, his suspicious behavior after Laci's disappearance, the timing of his fishing trip, and the damning location where the bodies were found. Though they lacked direct physical evidence, no murder weapon, no blood evidence, no eyewitnesses to the crime, prosecutors built their case on circumstantial evidence and Scott's own incriminating behavior. They introduced the homemade concrete anchors Scott had manufactured, one of which was missing and presumed used to sink Laci's body. They presented evidence that Scott had researched water currents in the bay and bought his boat just weeks before Laci vanished. But perhaps the most powerful evidence came from Amber Frey. Taking the stand for 7 days, Frey testified about Scott's deceptions and played recordings of their phone conversations, including calls where Scott pretended to be celebrating New Year's Eve in Paris while actually standing at a vigil for Laci in Modesto. In one chilling recording from December 31st, he described looking out over the Eiffel Tower when he was actually attending a candlelight vigil for his missing wife. The defense, led by Mark Garagos, argued that Laci had been kidnapped and murdered by unknown perpetrators who then framed Scott by disposing of her body in the bay. They pointed to a burglary across the street from the Peterson home on December 24th to 26th and suggested the burglars might have abducted Laci when she confronted them. The defense also highlighted the lack of physical evidence linking Scott to the murder and brought in experts who challenged the prosecution's timeline. Throughout the trial, Scott's demeanor remained stoic, showing little emotion, even when photographs of Laci's remains were displayed. This coldness did not go unnoticed by the jury or the public watching the televised proceedings. After 5 months of testimony and evidence, the case went to the jury on November 3, 2004. After 7 days of deliberation on November 12, 2004, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder for killing Laci and second-degree murder for the death of Connor. When the verdict was read, cheers erupted outside the courthouse where crowds had gathered to await the decision. On December 13th, the jury recommended the death penalty. Judge DeLucchi formally sentenced Scott to death on March 16, 2005, telling him, "The court is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Scott Lee Peterson, is guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances and second-degree murder. Scott Peterson was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, joining California's death row, just miles from where Laci's body had washed ashore. The conviction of Scott Peterson brought a measure of closure to Laci's family, but left lingering questions among some observers about whether justice had truly been served. While many were convinced of Scott's guilt, others pointed to the entirely circumstantial nature of the case, the lack of forensic evidence, and what they viewed as a trial influenced by media pressure and public opinion. In the years following his conviction, Scott maintained his innocence from death row, insisting through interviews and appeals that he had been wrongfully convicted. His defense team filed multiple appeals, arguing that juror misconduct, media influence, and errors by the trial judge had prevented Scott from receiving a fair trial. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, ruling that potential jurors were improperly dismissed after expressing objections to capital punishment. While his conviction remained intact, the court ordered a new sentencing hearing. Before that could occur, in December 2021, Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office consulted with Laci's family and decided not to seek the death penalty again. The case took another turn in 2022 when the Los Angeles Innocence Project, LAIP, agreed to represent Scott, filing court documents seeking new DNA testing and access to evidence from the original investigation. In January 2024, the LAIP formally submitted a writ of habeas corpus arguing that newly discovered evidence could exonerate Scott. They specifically requested testing of a blood-stained mattress found near the crime scene and DNA testing of tape residue found on Laci's body. Critics of the conviction point to several elements they believe raise reasonable doubt. They note that the precise cause of Laci's death was never determined, that no evidence directly linked Scott to the actual killing, and that the timeline presented by prosecutors had inconsistencies. Some question whether Laci could have been abducted during her morning walk, pointing to witness statements reporting seeing her after Scott had already left for his fishing trip. Supporters of the verdict counter that the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, combined with Scott's deceitful behavior and the damning geographical connection between his fishing trip and the location where the bodies were found, leaves little room for reasonable doubt. They argue that no plausible alternative explanation accounts for all the evidence in the case. Today, Scott Peterson remains in Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, serving his life sentence while his legal team continues to fight for what they claim will be exonerating evidence. The controversy surrounding his guilt or innocence remains a divisive topic among legal experts and true crime followers. The tragedy of Laci and Connor Peterson extends far beyond the courtroom drama and media frenzy that surrounded the case. At its heart, this is the story of a young woman whose life was cut short just as she was preparing to become a mother, and an unborn child who never had the chance to take his first breath. The case left an indelible mark on American society, raising awareness about domestic violence and the disturbing reality that pregnancy can be a dangerous time for women in abusive relationships. Following Laci's murder, Congress passed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act in 2004, also known as Laci and Connor's Law, which recognizes an unborn child as a legal victim if killed or injured during the commission of a crime. For Laci's family, especially her mother, Sharon Rocha, who became an advocate for victims' rights, the pain of loss continues decades later. The family has maintained that despite ongoing legal challenges, they remain convinced of Scott's guilt and are committed to ensuring that Laci and Connor are remembered not just for how they died, but for the lives they lived and might have lived. Whether Scott Peterson is guilty of this heinous crime or the victim of a flawed justice system remains a question that continues to divide opinion. What is certain is that somewhere beneath the sensational headlines and courtroom tactics lies the truth of what happened on that Christmas Eve morning in 2002, a truth that, for many, remains elusive despite the conviction. If you found this case as compelling and disturbing as millions of others have, please take a moment to subscribe to Last Seen Stories and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us continue exploring these important cases that have shaped our legal system and collective consciousness. Have a case you'd like us to cover next? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. Next week, we'll be examining another disappearance that shocked a community and led investigators down a path no one expected. Until then, thank you for joining me in remembering Laci and Connor Peterson.